Hello, everyone. This is the Distracted Spectrum, episode maybe 19 or 18. ADHD. It just went that way, but we are
Numbers.
with the Archaeowolf, the archaeologist that growls.
Hey,
So,
everybody.
introduce yourself. Where'd you go to college? You are an
All right.
archaeologist, so clearly you're
Yeah.
educated.
Yeah. So my name's Morgan. I go by Archaeowolf on social media. I've been a professional archaeologist for about 16 years now. I got my bachelor's degree in anthropology, focused in archaeology at the University of Montana, where I coincidentally had my first job working in the historics artifacts lab, reaccessioning and curating all of these artifacts from field schools and the repository and everything.
Did you guys ride
Um,
horses to school?
I know a kid.
I rode a
I know a kid
four-wheeler.
who rode his horse to school just to prove the point. Um, I grew up around horses. I grew up on a ranch. My grandparents, um, on my mom's side actually came out from New Jersey in the 70s. And my grandfather retired, bought a ranch, and then worked for another 30 years. And of course, I was the only grandson who did anything. So I, of course, was, worked there in the summers, changing irrigation pipe, fixing fence. But the person that had horses was my grandmother, and she was like, they're Arabians, and they were like ribbons, thousands of ribbons, big time show horses, and I wasn't even allowed to like talk to these things, let alone ride one around. So
Yeah.
my horse was a Polaris racing four wheeler that looked like a canary.
Hey, I
It
had
was
a, I had a 1992 blue Honda 300 4x4. I had
that
I
would have
had
been
it.
a better machine for what I was doing.
Well, I had about $800 of work done to the motor of this thing,
Hmm.
and I could pass cars on the highway.
Oh yeah,
It
oh yeah,
was
not
it
surprising.
was the meanest machine in all of Eastern
Nice,
Kentucky. And Brody Dixon, if you are watching, verify that in the comment section.
cool.
I
Um,
had him so scared that like literally his fingernails, there was a thumbs up. Um,
nice.
his fingernails cut me multiple times.
Ooh, ooh. Well, at least he didn't fall off. Um,
He did.
I tangent, so we just went on a tangent. There's
Yep.
one. I'll keep a tally. Um,
ADHD strike.
right. After graduation, it took me a little bit to get through college. I took some time off and, went to flight school, tried to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, had these grand ideas. And one of my friends, here's the thing that goes back to, issues with education and stuff in the United States. When I was in high school, we had a guidance counselor who was like, if you don't go to college, you're going to be plumbers. Like that was a bad thing. Now, I've never seen a plumber, unless he's a bad one, without a boat or a brand new Chevrolet in his driveway. So I don't know what the guidance counselor was on in that regard.
And normally a brand new Chevy work truck. Well, Ford work
Yeah.
truck. People tend to go
Um,
Ford on
yeah. I
on
mean,
the working
whatever
end.
your proclivity is, but new
Yeah,
truck.
new truck.
Um, and but at the same time, it was very little help in getting into a school. And if
Yeah,
you were like me, kind of stumbling through high school, obviously really good at some, really bad at others, there was really no effort to help. I'm going to have to join the army and whatever.
yeah.
And like I went to school and I was going to be a journalist. I've always wanted to be an archaeologist. Like it's been my dream since I was a little kid. Which is kind of a cliche thing to say. Most archaeologists will tell you the same. But like I wanted to be an archaeologist, but for some reason I thought you had to go to somewhere like Yale or Cambridge or something like that to become an archaeologist because it's a very
Like
academic field.
like Professor Howard
Yeah,
Williams and
I
his
know.
tea.
And his tea. Um,
I hope he
so
sees
I
that.
went to school and I started college in the fall of '02, and I went for like 2 years and kind of just general ed winged it. And then I decided I was going to be a journalist, more specifically a war correspondent. And that's because I met this one professor who was from South Dakota, but he went like full culture immersion in Turkey. So he had like the really sweet stash and his eyebrows were pointed. His wife was Turkish, wore the same style of clothing and everything.
I can jive with that
And
guy.
he was a war correspondent or a military journalist.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, this is super cool. But, and then I got burned out, had issues, took a 3-year break, went to flight school, came back, re-enrolled, and a friend of mine, well, no, we're a little out of order. I got a little burned out while I was doing my anthropology degree. And then, yeah. No, a friend of mine was like, you've always wanted to do this. You really like this. Why don't you go be an archaeologist? And I was like, we don't have a program for that. And she looks at me with like, she's talking to a cow in the headlights. She's like, yeah, we do. It's in social sciences building. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, anthropology, duh. So I went to the anthropology building. I managed to get a hold of the professor who would be my advisor, which is an impossible thing to do. She's like a ninja. She's always busy. You never get time with her. I walked in, she was in her office. I talked to her for about 5 minutes and she's like, I already see you've got what it takes to do this. Boom. Blank sheet. Signed it. Blank sheet. Get your course load for next semester. So, got my degree, from the University of Montana, moved to Arizona, worked down in the Southwest doing archaeology, cultural resource management down there. Started my master's in 2015, and through Alamosa or Adams State University in Alamosa, Colorado. Online program because I've got to work. I can't go sit in a brick and mortar classroom, And I'm almost done with my fancy book report, but that's not stopped me from gaining positions, including permanence, through the efforts of working for 2 federal agencies on federal land doing cultural resource management and archaeological protection work. So right now I am.
Oh, I
Yeah.
do want you to talk about the one part before we get into everything, the archaeological protection work. So,
Yeah.
like,
So
I'm from an area where it's very scarce of what the rules are. It's county to county almost. I don't know if there's even state regulations. And there's creeks full of arrowheads. There's indigenous artifacts in almost every cave. I mean, I showed you fossils. I showed you some of the,
There is a difference with fossils in this. So the United States, both federal and state governments, and the state governments really just copy pasted. So you can read like the National Historic Preservation Act or the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, which are federal laws. You can read those and you will reread them when looking at your state regulations. And the only thing they changed was like, instead of, this United States, it is the state of Kentucky. Like they did the little changes to make it specific to the states in question. But archaeology or archaeological resources are protected on federal and state land. They are protected on private property.
National Forest.
If there's, that's part of federal.
Okay, so like Daniel Boone National Forest, guys.
Yeah,
for those
Daniel Boone National Forest. You can, if it's, the National Forest operates under the Forest Service.
Right.
And when people say that there's nobody there to talk to, there's nobody there to call, I'm an archaeologist for a national forest. I am in charge of, I think it's I don't know what a third of 1.3 million acres is, or my third is 1.3 million acres. I'm not even sure.
It's a lot of land.
It's a lot. Those resources are protected under federal law due to the fact that once they are damaged, once they are destroyed, there is no bringing them back. They're not like a tree. They're not like a deer. They are considered a non-renewable resource. And the only reason they're a resource is because in this country we speak money. And if you can, in an effort to protect something, tie it to a cost, suddenly there's just more avenues for it. So bodies of water are under the jurisdiction of the state. If it's a large body of water, like the big rivers over there,
Great,
Army
yeah,
Corps of
yeah.
Engineers. Army Corps of Engineers is a federal agency. So
What
they
about
are
creeks? Things
creeks.
like,
Yep.
yeah.
They are usually under the jurisdiction of the state. That comes from that comes from water rights and such, during homesteading and everything,
Right.
trying to protect the water rights so everybody could have some versus somebody just damming up the creek and saying all the water is mine now and you have to pay me for it.
What was that show?
Um,
The Dome, where the one dude had all the control of the water. There was like this weird outer space phenomena that happened, and it domed in a town, and this one dude had control of the town
uh,
water supply to sort of
yeah, well,
prevent
I mean,
that.
that's essentially the same principle as that.
Right.
The hoarding of a resource, waterways are under the jurisdiction of the state. Um, Technically, you can walk through someone's private property if you are below the high water mark.
Right.
And the idea of that is that it protects you as a citizen should you fall off a boat and you get washed away at high, or, and you come up on somebody's bank that they don't get rid of you, or you don't get charged for trespassing because it was the first part. You come out safely and you're on private property.
Right.
So the removal of artifacts is against the law. Doesn't matter what it is. 50 years old and older is considered historic in the United States.
And so if you were to be walking through a creek and you look down and you find indigenous artifacts, arrowheads, whether they're this big, or you're in one of the caves and you find similar things.
Please don't dig in caves.
Not digging. I mean, there's places like in Kentucky where they're just on the surface. You can literally still find them.
The thing about caves and rock shelters and stuff, the burials are found there more than not.
Right. So what should someone do? Just call the state?
So your
it?
options are, first, if you find human remains, regardless of how old, call the sheriff.
Call the cops.
Call law enforcement. It's part of their job.
Right.
The Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, they all have law enforcement officers. So if you're in Yosemite or Daniel Boone National Park and it's outside the purview of, Johnson County Sheriff, you can call the national park and they have a law enforcement officer there, and it's his job to maintain law and order on his national park or national forest. Call them first. Call the land management agency. If you can't get through there, call your state agency. So every single state has what's called a historic preservation office. We refer to these as SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office. They are the record keepers for all of the archaeological work done within those state boundaries. They are the ones that hold the inventory reports for every single project that is done. And they're tied heavily with like the historical societies, which run the museums and the places of interest and stuff like that. And they have archaeologists on staff.
That's who I want.
And if they don't, they have the direct phone number to the contractors that do the work. They have the direct phone number for, say, you can't get a hold of me. All right, that's fine. I'm not near my phone all the time. And you have to call the SHPO. The person at SHPO will say, well, here's the person you need to talk to through the National Forest. And they will either kick you to me and say, here, who it is. Or they'll be like, if you can't get through to them, here is essentially the licensed archaeologist that works for Heritage West or, the Archaeological Conservancy, agencies like that maintain the protections on archaeological resources. So much data gets lost.
Right.
Yeah. You shouldn't post
the location or images on social media until the investigation and such is finished and you have permission.
Yeah, that's good. That's good manners. What was told to us in the field of archaeology when I was working in the private sector in Arizona was you can take pictures of certain artifacts. Certain. Artifacts associated with burials, no. Artifacts within burials, no. And that doesn't matter if it was a cremation and it's just some ashes in a pot to full laid out skeletons. You cannot take pictures of burials or the grave goods. And that's like for the investigators too. Like we who are doing the data recording, it is a point of cultural recognition and respect.
Is that why all the archaeologist stuff is the drawings and not?
Yeah. So there's the significant amount of drawings, artifact drawings and stuff. Lots of stuff was found before the advent of easily accessible cameras.
Right.
You know, because the camera came about in like 1815. But like with all technology, the early versions are very expensive to use, and they're very clunky to use.
And even then, you're not dragging those in a cave. Like the iPhone changed the game when it comes to that
iPhone
stuff.
has changed the game. Digital cameras have changed the game. Handheld cameras, you know, that don't need a tripod. You know, yep. That's a perfect example. But it's not just, and you can take this bit about the don't take pictures of grave goods or burials and apply it to a lot of the stuff around archaeology, including looting sites, is that these are not bottle caps to be collected. These are not just things on the ground. These are a tie to ancestor populations. Yes. These are a tie to cultural backgrounds that have suffered horrendously thanks to colonization.
The only reason it's laying there is because we ran everybody off that owned it.
Yeah, because the site was abandoned, because it got dropped. Now, if you look at how archaeology is done in Europe, you can acquire Roman coins.
People find them in their yard all the time.
People find them in their yard. Roman nails, big deal. There was, I saw on an archaeological site in Greece, they're digging shingles, clay shingles out of the ground, and they're literally just hucking them into a pile, and it doesn't matter if they shatter. There's hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and there is this distance between, in time, with the modern Greeks, or the modern British, or the modern Italians, and these ancestral populations. And there's this distance of, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
But the frontier closed. We subdued the indigenous peoples less than 150 years ago. You know, there are still people alive who, as little children, knew people who were at like Little Bighorn or you know, these big events in history. It is not a faraway thing.
I have friends whose grandma was in the indigenous boarding schools, ripped away from her family, yada yada yada.
Yeah,
like. No, this isn't ancient. This is not ancient history. This is like
no, it's not.
The people are still.
It's
still
right here. Yeah, and to reduce those objects to just some stuff in a box
that I can put on
is a problem. Yeah, is a problem, and it's extremely disrespectful. And one of the things that is this bugbear that archaeology has to acknowledge is that. For the first early part of this profession, that's exactly what we did.
Especially in Egypt.
We just took the shinies, especially in Egypt, especially in the Middle East. You know, we get more data and information about a population out of the garbage dump with the broken cut bone and the broken ceramic and stuff like that than we ever do the shiny stuff that comes out of Tut's tomb. Yep. Yes, that stuff's cool. Don't get us wrong. But that's just a micro snapshot of the reality of Egyptian culture or Assyrian culture.
And even then, you learn more from the walls than you do what's in the place, mostly.
Yeah. So
that's why the Rosetta Stone was such a big deal.
Yeah, that was the thing, because it was this tie together, and it shows not only that, it shows the extent of interaction around the Mediterranean, because you know, we have people operating with certain worldviews and certain, you know, directions that their peripheral or their vision is looking, and it's not something that they consider. So you can be like, oh, well, you know, your town is the one that drinks the most Pepsi per capita in the country. Somewhere, you might not know that somewhere there is a town that drinks more RC Cola.
That would probably be us too, because that's where it's made.
Well, okay. Well, bad example, but you know, you've got this, you know, your picture is small.
Yes.
You know, compared to the reality of the world, and then when you pick up something that shows all of this other stuff, it's like, holy crap, you now have to open your mind and recognize those things.
And you can make that Pepsi statement and go, oh my gosh, like Pepsi must love that town. And Pepsi probably is like, yeah, that town's cool. We love Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. Because Atlanta has a football team. Yeah, it's bigger, you know.
Exactly.
There's stuff behind that, yeah. The protection stuff, though, jumping back to that real quick, the amount of data that gets lost when sites get looted as well is astounding.
Right.
When I tell you that some of the smallest things manage to survive in the archaeological record, I mean microscopic. And when that stuff gets taken out of the ground and washed and mixed together, it's completely out of context. It ruins it. I've tried to explain archaeological sites, and I'm taking this from one of my professors, shamelessly. They flat out said, this is a crime scene. Put that in your head, that an archaeological site is a crime scene.
Yes.
Treat it like that.
I said
you
that
find an arrowhead here.
Before.
Yeah. You know, you find an arrowhead here. How do you know it's from that site? How do you know it's associated with it? Oh, because it's this far from this object and this far from this object, which were found this deep. Here's the correlating data and points and photos. You can then take that to court and prove what you're saying about that site. All of that data and evidence is incredibly important.
It works the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
It works the exact same way.
I use a lot of analogies in my content. You know, I usually, because I'm a car guy, I kind of tie it to cars or machinery or stuff that, you know, is real quick. But if you look at an archaeological site like a crime scene, we've watched enough CIS or you know, CSI or whatever and crime dramas and stuff. We understand that chain of custody. We understand that, you know, here's a piece of evidence that showed up late. Notice how everybody asks about, why is it late? Why wasn't it found here, 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 and here? So you have that. Archaeological sites are the same way. And I mean, we can get into.
That's a really good analogy. Well, I mean, even if you think about, like, Lee Berger learned this firsthand recently. If you come to a conclusion before the jury of your peers reach that conclusion with you, it's going to get you in trouble.
Yeah. Well, so there's a difference between trouble and scrutiny.
Yeah, that's what
there's a great example, and I'm sure if you've watched Graham Hancock or watched the Joe Rogan show with his shit. Sorry, I'm just.
Yeah, you're fine.
Sorry for the adult language if there's people listening that don't care for that. We cuss a lot in this field. When you look at Graham Hancock, because he's my buddy, and we and he's just the greatest example of all the things to not do. He talks about the Clovis first hypothesis, and I don't know, Jono, if you've heard of this, but the peopling of the Americas when humans first showed up in North and South America has been a hot debate for a very long time.
Right.
And one of the oldest sites that was found in North America was found in the 20s in New Mexico, and it's called the Clovis site.
Yeah.
So we have taken this name of this little railroad town, we've applied that name to the site because of their distance from each other, and because the artifacts that came out of that excavation,
is huge, by the way.
Yeah, it is huge, but it's also so incredibly distinct.
Yes.
It is so incredibly distinct.
The burials were even.
There were no burials there.
I'm thinking of a different one.
You're thinking of a different site. No, the Clovis site was a lithic cache. So somebody stockpiled spear points and scrapers and all this stuff and hid it away on likely like a migrational transit route or a trade network. So they could, like, I remember, 20 paces off of this rock that looks like an owl, I have a new spear point, or all this stuff that if you need the supplies. But it was this lithic
center.
No, it was like a supply depot.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's just that you cached some supplies away, and on your travels, when you pass a spot, you can re-up on your spear points.
I was thinking of is it
Cahokia or Chaco Canyon? Yeah,
that one, the second one.
Chaco Canyon. Yep. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
That comes a little far later after Clovis. But the Clovis site in the 1920s, when it was excavated, had these very distinct spear points, to the point where you could say every site with that spear point is a Clovis site. It was incredible. Distinct. It was that distinct. And the dating methodology in the 1920s and 30s, when this site was excavated, put the site at about 13,500 years, give or take 500 years. And it's the oldest site in the Americas when that was published in the 1930s. That's 90 years ago.
I was about to say, that's 6 years from me in 100 years. I mean,
yeah, it's been a while. Other sites were found around the United States that had these same spear points, and the testing methods and everything showed that those sites also, they weren't 13,000, but they were 12,000. They were 11,000. They were 10,500. There was one that was like 95, but the spear points had changed a little bit. So, well, is this Clovis? But the idea is that this population of people who made these spear points, that we call the Clovis people, because the spear points is what we know about them, they were the first ones to get to the Americas. Through the land bridge, which there's lots of back and forth about the land bridge. There's also recognition that things float. We could do a whole show on that,
bro. Hours on that.
But one of the things that, like, Graham Hancock likes to talk about is, well, if you believed in Clovis first, or if you tried to challenge Clovis first, you were run out of your job, you were fired, you were ostracized. And that's not the case. There's that's not the case at all. No. There's a guy an archaeologist in Alaska, who in the late 1970s pushed Clovis first back to 24,000 years. Mm-hmm. Pushed human occupation in the Americas back to 24,000 years. And his evidence was a piece of horse jawbone from a cave in the Yukon that has incised marks on it that could only be done by tools. Further excavations in this cave show later occupations of humans. It's still incredibly old. This person said, hey, this is, based on the depth, based on this, this is this old. And people pushed back only because, where's the rest of your evidence? His evidence was a little thin. And nothing else was being found that
doesn't mean that he's wrong. It just means
it doesn't mean that he's wrong.
Have enough evidence.
It does, yeah. And it's he doesn't have enough evidence for us to go, yeah, we're going to absolutely accept that.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
His findings were, it was just too loose, too fragmentary. Well, in the 90s, carbon-14 dating suddenly became far more accurate and available.
Yes.
To academic institutions, to state companies, and some of this horse jawbone was tested, and the site at Bluefish Caves is 24,200 years old. We dropped the subject of Clovis first.
Yep.
We stopped talking about Clovis first as a, not completely, but as a viable hypothesis.
Correct.
In the 80s. Now, I was born in the 80s. I'm 40. So we dropped this.
I was born in the 80s.
We dropped this hypothesis a while ago. And we talk about Clovis first as hey, here is a hypothesis that came out when the technology and when the knowledge supported that. Right. We have better technology. We have better data. We have more evidence. Clovis first was good when it came out. It has since been supplanted.
Period.
That's why we talk about Clovis first. Clovis first keeps coming up, though, with conspiracy and Graham Hancock and stuff, because it's an attempt for them to discount and dismiss what archaeologists say, because, you know, Graham Hancock's making money off of his TV show.
Joe Rogan, man. He's credible.
Oh, yeah. Joe Rogan's making money. And, you know, it all goes out the window when someone like myself says, well, actually, here's a bunch of evidence that shows that you're wrong. You're making money off of telling people lies. And then they of course, that would create drama. So, which is why watching Graham Hancock's show, for 20 minutes, he makes us out to be the bad guys. We're out to get him. All this stuff. I'm like, dude, no. 2, if we were out to get you, you wouldn't have a TV show. You'd probably be in a barrel in the Hudson by now. You know, it's you know,
we're archaeologists, bro. We know how to make things go underground.
We can hide the body. We can, yeah. So it's definitely one of those things. It's like, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Where were we?
No,
Clovis first.
We were just talking about just archaeology and the rules around it and what people should do when they come across these sites. And then just how archaeology people have been, you were talking about how people have just been kind of careless with information and how we come to factual conclusions that can be, you know, taught in a classroom.
Tested. Yeah.
Right.
So first thing, touching back on what people should do is, if you come across an archaeological site, if you come across artifacts, it can be a single artifact, it can be a lot of them, is call the land management agency, call your state historic preservation office. Because that resource deserves to be protected. It needs to be protected, and there are laws protecting it. Take pictures. Take a GPS point. You know, if you email your state historic preservation officer and say, hey, I found a site off of Smithview Road, he's going to be like, cool, what can I do with this? If you say, hey, I found a site off of Smithville Road, here's a point, or here's a GPS point, there were like 5 arrowheads coming out of the bank and some white stuff that might be bone, they'll have somebody there inside of an hour, you know, because human remains are involved. Moving stuff is, I mean, stuff that gets found on the surface or turned up by a plow. The context is a little wrecked, but we can still learn a lot from those pieces as long as they don't suddenly wind up in a shoebox. Right. The act of going out and looting sites, though, is so bad.
It's grave robbing.
Well, yes and no. You know, if there's a burial involved, yes. If the grave robbing is the intent of breaking into burials and selling the valuables out of those burials. Right. Archaeologists get called grave robbers all the time. As a part of human history, burials are a thing. Well, you know, I have not been on an excavation project where human remains were found since 2015. If archaeology is grave robbing, what have I been doing for the last decade? Because I haven't found any dead people, you know?
Right.
Well, I take that back. I have found graves on survey and stuff, historic graves and things, but you don't dig them up. You mark them on the map and you put a buffer around them so the machine doesn't get them, you know? There is a web page, I want to say it's savehistory.org, where if you see somebody looting an archaeological site, vandalizing an archaeological site or cultural resource, you can get up to $10,000 as a reward for turning them in.
Oh, I'm about to start sending them TikToks.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they've gotten a lot, but like, if you're out in the forest picking huckleberries or, you know, taking the kids fishing or whatever, and you see somebody defacing a historic cabin or something like that, or damaging an indigenous site, you can turn that person in, and it leads to, and get them in trouble. And that's something of, if you follow on TikTok and things, archaeologists on there have kind of, we called attention to the looting accounts. You know, there's a number that we really can't go into any detail about it because law enforcement is involved.
Right.
You know, it's now the court's process, and you know, we gotta keep our noses out of it. But so those protections are in place. I have a link on my, if you find me on TikTok, I have a link in my bio there that takes you to a list that I personally put together, researched and all, for every single regulation that the U.S. government operates by, and that includes, that's military bases, that is territories, that is you know, sovereign territory. Technically, even though indigenous artifacts, you know, their indigenous people left them, even on the reservations, those government protections are in place because they're technically federal government, in a long roundabout way that is convoluted because government. But it's a list of all the federal regulations, and there's a lot. And then it's a breakdown of all of the laws in every single state.
Very cool.
And Guam and Puerto Rico. And these laws, like so many other laws, apply to U.S. interests overseas. We have a base on Okinawa. You know, we have a base in Germany. All of our bases technically abide by our cultural resource laws. Meanwhile, you know, at the site in Germany, they are not going to care about Roman coins. On, you know, whatever air base that big one is that we have a postage stamp of space on, you're not allowed to keep Roman coins found on that spot.
Right.
Because in those cases, the American cultural resource laws do take precedent. And one of the things is that all the agencies have archaeologists or cultural people in some fashion, including the military. There are people who, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Monuments Men, but it does stem from the Second World War. This group of advisors who's like, guys, don't blow up that church. Don't blow up that pyramid. Don't blow up this site if you can avoid it. Plus, you know, trying to maintain protections on cultural things because, you know, it's so devastating to lose everything about your culture.
Right.
Including the stuff that ties you to the past. So those protections are there, and John, I'll send you those links if you got a place you want to toss them. Oh, you have them?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I'll send you the Save History one, because I know I just made a video about it, and then like the great social media wizard I am, I didn't put it in my in my bio, or on my links page, I don't think, because, you know, ADHD. But so those resources are there. Those resources also can be used if somebody wants to get involved with archaeology, because I know a lot of people, it excites them to find something old. How do they do it without violating the law? You can get on to actual excavations. Right. You can do actual archaeological monitoring, depending if your state has these programs, that you can volunteer to do. And you get the education, you have somebody who is checking your work, so it is being done in accordance to the state and federal regulations, but you're still the one who's finding stuff. And right. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the most boring jobs on an archaeological site is sifting dirt. Yet one of the most exciting jobs on an archaeological site is sifting dirt, because you're finding some things that come out of the ground that no one else sees. And it really is amazing what gets preserved. So
that is awesome.
There's that.
So that's kind of the scope of what archaeology does and is. And throughout the history of the earth, you know, we're sitting here, we're both pale skinned white guys in a world full of color and different people and all of that. And so there's been who knows how many mass extinction events. I mean, creatures have come and gone. There was multiple waves of dinosaurs. There's multiple we're closer in time.
The Cambrian extinction.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many other creatures had to go extinct for us to get here that it's insane. But however many millions of years ago, it wasn't like here we are. Like there's
we didn't just appear.
There's multiple sets of things like us. And so what are
there were for a long time,
what are the humanoids? When do we think that they started showing up? And like what name a few, give us some details on them, like, because so
first things first, because it is out there. The word homo means man in Latin.
Right.
So when you hear Homo sapien, that's us. We are sapient man.
Correct.
Throughout the history of hominids, which are the apes that we come from, and us, the first uses of tools that appear in the archaeological record, I want to say, is like 4 million years. When somebody,
stone tool,
some ancient human ancestor made the realization that this rock is sharper than this other rock. You see tool usage in animals today. Eagles either will pick up turtles and drop them on the rocks, and the rock that they're dropping on is like an anvil. That's a tool.
Yep.
Or they pick up, or you see birds or animals that can articulate with their hands. I mean, I've seen bears do this, where they use an object to get at their food resource. Here's a rock, I'm gonna push this rock on a carcass. Yeah. That's tool usage. Right. You look at chimpanzees and stuff, they're using little sticks to get the ants out of the anthill. That's using a tool. Birds use tools in the Galapagos to dig bugs out of the wood.
I've seen images of like chimpanzees spearfishing.
Yeah. The thing about tools, though, is that you can pick up a rock and smack something with it and then drop the rock. Yes, it's a tool. That's not going to show up very well in the archaeological record. But you looking at a piece of rock that has an edge to it and using that edge and then trying to keep that edge and figuring out that if you break pieces off it, you can shape it, that's when you suddenly start having like manufactured tools. And I want to say that shows up about 4 million years ago. Early hominid stuff is not my purview.
Right.
In the world of anthropology, which is, and this is how we study it in the United States, is anthropology is the umbrella. And underneath the umbrella, you have archaeology, which is my specialty, and that is the study of humanity through their stuff.
Their stuff.
That's the artifacts, and because stuff can include buildings, things that have been added to archaeology includes like landscape modification, architecture, stuff like that. Things humans do and build. Bioanthropology is the study of the meat and potatoes and bones of humans. Sociocultural anthropology is the study of culture and society. Asking yourself, why is this important? Why is a law a law? Why do we in the United States like football?
Right.
That would be, if somebody's studying sociocultural behavior, what purpose does this game have? What purpose does, religion falls under that, where you're studying how a society grows.
You're Christian because you're white.
Well, not necessarily.
No,
I mean,
just making a
but
joke.
the influences that lead to the development of things in certain places where they didn't develop in other places. And
Yes.
then the fourth focus in anthropology is linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the United States, you have a distinct accent. I have probably a distinct accent to you. I can't hear an accent.
I can't hear mine.
When I'm talking to my mother after she's been talking to my granddad, my mother sounds like she's on the Jersey Shore again. The dialect, the vernacular, stuff like that, that's under the study of linguistics. And that all does come together into this mass of humans. So to be in archaeology, you need to know a little bit out of every category. And because, you can have an artifact that is made because of a sociocultural reason, but artifacts, start with early on, start with the basics of getting food, getting shelter. They're not sophisticated. There's no one's walking around with necklaces on or anything like that really early on. It is hey, here's a thing that helps us bring down dinner. Throughout the evolution of hominids, that stuff changes. It changes because of a number of reasons. One, hey, the more trial and error, the more sophisticated the thing gets. You teach your kids the sophisticated way of making it.
Right.
They're going to use the sophisticated way day one, and their children are going to learn probably a more sophisticated way to do things, an easier way to do things. Technology changes because of the environment they're in. If the weather changes and you eat one type of deer, the weather changes, kills this particular plant, and all the deer die. What are you going to do for food? Well, you're going to need to take down something bigger. You'll learn that the spear point you've been using on the deer is not going to work on a water buffalo. So you take the principle of the spear and you go, well, this works. What do we have to do to make it work on this? It gets bigger. It's so the technology, the way technology evolves is necessity. What's the saying? Necessity is the mother of all invention.
Right.
Humans, evolution is kind of the same thing when you look at how animals exist across the planet. Not just hominids, but all of them. You look at a landscape, you look at an ecosystem, and you have a giant apex predator, a crocodile. There's no crocodiles in North America, but there's an alligator. The two are so similar, yet so different, but they fill the same niche in the ecosystem.
I think they have let some loose in South Florida, and they've started.
Oh, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Invasive species are a thing, Hey, they might move in and drive the North American alligator extinct.
Facts.
Because they don't have the environmental pressures on them, The evolution of people changes because the landscape changes, the Sahara used to be a green jungle, right? And all of our ancestors lived in the trees. Well, there's a shift in the earth, culture or climate change happens in some way. All those trees start to thin out. Well, the ancient human ancestors that were more geared to being in the trees, they're not going to survive very long in a place where there's no trees or thin trees. So the hominid ancestors that have taken to the bipedal walking a little bit and have expanded their range because they're on the ground walking, suddenly have this leg up. And you see in the archaeological record the anthropological record where they become prominent, and this other species does not continue because the environment changes. So
you start seeing things fall off as the earth is shifting and changing.
Woolly mammoths and modern elephants.
Yeah.
Woolly mammoths lived in a world where at the glacial maximum it was really, really, really cold. They died off because of a rather rapid shift, and we're talking thousands of years, not just overnight, but thousands of years. You have this shift to where the environment's no longer feasible for a woolly mammoth. But the Asian elephant and the African elephant are, and at that time period there would have been the North African elephant as well. Mm-hmm. You have, they're just a little bit better tuned for the changes, and they're able to, there's a book I will send you. It's called Other Lands. I so recommend it because it talks a lot about the evolutionary stuff that you really want to chew on. It talks about how there's mammals that ate from the trees, and then there were mammals that ate grass, and then there was that mammal that existed in the middle that ate both. Well, when the trees died out or thinned out or became scarce, suddenly all of the mammals that solely ate trees were in trouble. And the ones that ate grass survived because the grasslands took over. And the ones that could eat both trees and grass, well, they just started eating grass. So you see those changes, go through. If it doesn't remain viable, nature doesn't have it keep going, Hominids, as we move along, because I know people say, well, if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Because there's a place in the environment in the ecosystem and everything for those creatures to continue. They do not fill the same role in an ecosystem that we do.
Exactly.
Our ancestors, like Neanderthals and the Denisovans and stuff, they were in place for a very long time.
Longer than us.
Culture, longer than us. Shifts in the environment. Shifts in their food sources, stuff like that. And then, you can have multiples of a creature, multiples of a species. Humans evolved because all the things came together leading up to this particular thing, this particular mixture of the genetic numbers game. And we were talking about your great-grandfather is one of the Appalachian Blue people.
Mm-hmm.
It is a fluke of genetics.
Right.
That, 1 in a million shot, that would happen, 1 in a billion shot, that particular genetic pattern would combine to result in a person that has a blue pigment to their skin. What if suddenly there's an event that favors the blue pigment? What if?
Yeah.
Suddenly, if we're on this still very primitive, all we do is eat, sleep, reproduce, the surviving or the more survivable mate, male or female, is going to be the survivor. So yes, you want that. You want the surviving genetic thing.
It's why the polar bears are intermingling with grizzly bears right now.
Yep. There's such a massive climate change that the polar bears are having stress on their environment and stress on them, so they are doing the next best thing.
They're breeding.
Eventually, there will be no polar bears.
Exactly.
There will be hybrids, and the hybrids will eventually just breed the genetically pure. And I hate using genetically pure because it leads to all sorts of other connotations.
Right.
But it kind of turns the valve off on that hose. If you think of a giant water network, you turn the valve off slowly to that hose, and eventually there's no more water running through that hose. That's because this didn't work. When you, in reference to how humans evolved and moved into the other continents, where they came in contact and conflict with, like the Neanderthals, or the Denisovans, or all of the other hominids that existed, humans as we are today, we appear about 200,000 years ago.
Yeah.
We were probably around a little bit earlier, but those fossils have not survived, take your pick. We didn't just appear, though. There was a line of hominids that were probably more like Neanderthals, that they're just geared to what we look like. Our evolution, our physical state is more adaptable than a Neanderthal or a Denisovan or whatever. So just like any situation where you move into an area, there's a conflict for resources, there's a conflict for territory, and you have the simple war, the simple driving off of, and if a population can't care for itself because it doesn't have resources, it goes extinct. Going to break into another analogy here. And gets bred out because there is signs that there is genetic evidence that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens crossbred.
Right.
That's fine. Going on another analogy tangent.
Back then it wouldn't have been a Homo sapien that looked like me and you.
Oh.
Not necessarily.
It would have been well.
Yes and no.
Well, that's yes and no. Certain features, depending on where you are in the world, and we can get into this in a second, will come and go based on the needs to survive in that environment. The analogy that I was going to go down for the conflict of what happens when you introduce something new is Yellowstone in the 90s. Wildlife biologists reintroduced a couple of packs of wolves. The wolf population in the 90s exploded. They ran amok. They killed lots more than, elk and deer and bison than the packs actually needed. And the packs were massive. And you had this wolf behavior and wolf system that had never really been observed before. You have packs of 80 wolves.
Yes.
When in reality, a healthy pack of wolves is 10. All of the sick, all of the dumb, all of the weak and deformed or whatever, the sickly that were born because the elk population is kind of a microcosm and it's continuing to breed with itself. There is incest in there at some point. All of the prey animals that had a deficiency, if you will, the wolves got. The wolves called those prey populations to the best of the best. And then suddenly, the wolves started dying off. These monster packs broke apart. They stopped caring for members in the packs that weren't pulling their weight. Crippled up ones, elderly ones, sickly ones. And you suddenly see this massive pack, or massive packs, they break up and they become more what nature intended. Because, they came in, they stressed the population out, but here's that
balance.
There's that balance that's found again, that evolution of the ecosystem. The balance is found again. The wolves can't go out and kill 15 deer in a week. They'll kill one,
right?
Which is what normally would happen in nature. Humans, when they show up in the Americas and they show up in Asia and everything, it becomes a control thing. It becomes here's a species that fills a niche and a species that fills that same niche. They either come together or one goes
disappears.
Away.
Yes.
Which one is the more quick to adapt? And that's where Homo sapiens, humans, we have the either the bigger brain capacity or we were just better at faster
it for some reason.
We just happen to be better at it. And so humans become the dominant hominid on the planet. If you were to take even your biggest human, take that guy who was in Game of Thrones, who played the Mountain. He's not necessarily the pinnacle of hominid evolution, though. Throw him up against a silverback gorilla. That form of the silverback is the quintessential biological machine for that ecosystem. You know, the human changes and exists in a different ecosystem than that. But we're both hominids, and we both are like, here it is. What can we do to change this design? Nothing? All right, this is what we're going to roll with. Evolution in humans really is visibly something that you see affected by your landscape. So, have you ever heard of Cheddar Man?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, DNA analysis of the bones of Cheddar Man, who is, for the people who are not familiar, Cheddar Man was found in Cheddar, England. He's a skeleton that was found in a cave. He has a descendant in that town.
Looks just like him.
Who's like, I think, the history teacher of all things.
Yes.
But Cheddar Man, genetically speaking, was very dark-skinned with blue eyes. And he's found in Britain, which is white, right? Cheddar Man's 10,000 and change years old. So
what happens with 10,000 years of rainy weather?
You don't need that thing. You know, the gene that puts the melanin in your skin stops really being needed. Somebody, you know, again with that genetic wild bingo, you have two individuals that reproduce, their offspring just has that one random number, their skin is a little bit paler. Oh. Huh. Well, if that offspring reproduces 8 times, that gene for paler skin is passed on. And then gets passed on. And then gets passed on. And each combination of genetics, of course, creates, you know, a new, you know, I'm trying to not say design, but it creates a new profile.
Well, yeah, it's like
that
if you think about
certain traits continue.
Like you think about your grandparents. Everybody has 4 grandparents, right? But if you go up one generation, you now have 8. And then you have 16. And then you have 32. It doubles every generation. Yeah. And so you have all these mixtures that is boiling down into creating you. And so,
you know, and like the example is that, you know, that looking at me, I'm 6'3". I am one of the tallest in my family, both on my mom's side and my dad's side. With the exception of one of my cousins and my uncle, my dad's little brother. He's taller than I am.
I think I might be the tallest.
If you look at the family tree, you know, the men are 5'10". And the men are 5'10" for a number of generations back. And then at some point, somebody's 5'8". Or everybody's 5'8". And you can see like the height differences change. You know, my dad can grow like the big Grizzly Adams beard. I can't. My grandfather on my mom's side can't grow a beard very well. You know? So there's that little bit of a genetic thing from my grandparents on that side of the family, where I don't grow a very good beard. My dad's uncle, my great uncle Chuck, had a shock of black hair until the day he died at like 89, never went bald. I have hair like my Uncle Chuck. My dad's bald, and my dad started going bald at 28. It's these little genetic things, that get passed along. Some of those outliers, like baldness, I don't know what environmental adaptation that is. But if you look at a more broad scale, cruelty, yeah. If you look at a more broad scale, all of the peoples around the world who live in like the northern hemispheres, regardless of whether or not they're European or Asian or indigenous, the skin tones are lighter compared to an equivalent population around the equator. And the reason is the sun's not around as much. So why do we need to maintain a gene in our evolution that doesn't serve a purpose? Meanwhile, go to Africa, go into the South Pacific, go into the Americas, Central and South America, where the sun is going all of the time. Everybody there has an adaptation to an environment where the sun is going all the time, and it's the darker skin. You know, if you look at people who live on islands, you know, island populations, like, you know, the Japanese, their stature is a little bit smaller than equivalent populations. Why? Japan is an island. You know, island populations. Now, it's not always how it happens, but you have what's called island dwarfism, which is certain creatures, because the resource base isn't the greatest, the smaller of that species that doesn't need the same amount of resources is the one that'll propagate. In the last, of course, you know, several thousand years, with humans moving around and traveling, the domestication of animals, the invention of stuff like the wheel and sailing ships and stuff, we've accelerated our evolution because we're able to do more genetic combinations. Which is why,
a good thing. It's actually healthy for us.
Which is a very good thing. Yeah. If you look at how certain populations exist, and then don't change, why don't they change? It's usually because there's some form of isolation, you know, and you know, islands, mountains, large bodies of water, you know, deserts. You can have populations that get separated because it is simply too costly, too hard, too difficult to get across those barriers. So you have a population here that not only physically will have some sort of difference, which isn't bad, it's just a reflection of the land environment they live in, but their cultures change, their language changes, their technology changes. So that's where archaeology really can look at something and be like, okay, here is an influence from here. Now we can start accounting for all of this stuff. What is that influence? Let's say copper is found in a site that has no copper, in a place that all of the excavations have never had any copper.
Suddenly there's copper found somewhere in like South America that wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah, and well, it's not that it wasn't supposed to be there. It's again the decolonization of all of this history that we have, where cultures in the Americas didn't have metal.
Except the oldest metal mine in the world is in Michigan.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And that's the thing. The thing that didn't happen in the Americas was iron. That was the difference.
Correct.
But you know, when you get into the conversations about why the education, why the background, why the history shows certain things, but not the whole picture, that gets into the inherent racism, the inherent religious, you know, diversion, condescension, whatever you want to call it.
Doctrine of discovery.
Yeah, it's where you get, and this is why the Graham Hancock stuff continues to work, and why, for shitty TV, and why certain groups push back so hard on acknowledging some of this history. I mean, I know sometimes I have my hackles up when I talk about some of the stuff, and I have no problem pointing to the loudest symptom or the biggest influence of.
Same.
Even though I know that, you know, I mean, one of my best friends is the cliche, I'm having a bad day, I spilled my coffee, whatever, I'm going to give it to Jesus. I love the guy. He's brilliant. He's one of my best friends. He lives his religious life in a way that corresponds with everything else. So there's no, I don't have a problem with religion. I have a problem with the way it has been used. Historically speaking, looking at archaeology and stuff in the world, and this ties into ethnicity, evolution, and stuff like that, because it's so obviously, it's the judging a book by its cover thing. You know, it's your first impression of, you know, if you see somebody who is so obviously different from you,
right,
red hair versus black hair, you know, if everybody in your town is redhead and I walk in with my black hair, you're going to see me. It's going to be like, oh shit, there's a guy with black hair. It's you know, that's that first impression.
That's my reality.
Unfortunately, yeah. Unfortunately, historically speaking, when it comes to archaeology and stuff, and anthropology and colonization, is that appearance is noted, and then justifications are made up to keep a distinction between. So, you know, one of the things Graham Hancock loves to talk about is the white God hypothesis. And he's tied it into his mother culture hypothesis, which is just garbage. Ignatius Donnelly, the guy that Hancock ripped off, who wrote a book in 1882, he really ran with this white God hypothesis. But it's the Spanish in the 1500s that come up with this white God hypothesis to justify stuff in Central and South America, which is they show up and the indigenous peoples down there, the indigenous cultures would have been the Aztecs at the time, but I mean, it's not, the Aztecs are not the only ones. There are dozens of cultural groups that exist under the mantle of the Aztec Empire, even though the leading peoples were called the Mexica.
Yes.
You know, Montezuma was Mexica. He wasn't Aztec. He was Mexica. No. It's like saying that, you know, you're Kentuckian, I'm a Montanan. We're both Americans. You know, here's this umbrella of the system that we live under, and then we have our distinct tribes.
Well, I mean, Native Americans, even Mexicans are Native Americans. Like, and so it's just different tribes. It's the same, but they're still all
it's different groups. But if all of those groups share one factor or one trait that makes them different from your group, you kind of just go, oh, well, everybody's
the same.
They're all this, and that's incredibly wrong.
It's like trying to explain to people that Africa's not a country.
Africa's not a country. Africa is a continent made up of many countries.
Yes.
The United States is a country. It's not a continent.
It's not a continent.
You know, yeah, man, we'd get into that. But if you look at in South America, when the Spanish show up, right? They show up and they meet these people who don't have the wheel. They're not wearing clothing like the Spanish wear. They're not afraid of God. They're so very different. Well, the first thing you see is they're obviously not European. And the further you get in, the Spanish were seeing the road systems, the buildings. You walk into a city of 500,000 people. There's like 2 cities in Spain with 500,000 people, you know. And there's multiple big cities like this, up to 1 million, I think, in Teotihuacan, or more. But how do you explain that? Because the first thing you walked into and you saw was the obvious evolutionary difference. How do you explain that these people are capable of the same thing, can do the same thing, are the same thing as you?
They built pyramids too.
They did. They built pyramids 3,000 years after the Egyptians did. That's a phenomenon called convergent evolution.
Since we both figured out triangles is a good shape. We
both figured out triangles. You know, we both figured out that if you pile up rock in a certain way, it's going to stay that way. Yep. You know who is credited with making the earliest composite material?
I do not.
Broad picture is the Mongols, because of their bows. Their recurve bows are made out of wood and horn that's glued all together and everything. Yeah. It was probably a group of people that got absorbed into the Mongols, you know, maybe the Scythians or the Batai or something like that. But And for a long time, they're the ones that made the first composite material, and that's pretty cool. Except for the fact that the Shoshone in Wyoming made composite bows out of ram's horn earlier.
Yes. Yes, they did.
Those two populations of humans, separated by centuries, is also separated by a body of water that isolates the two continents.
In a time where there was no airplanes and motors, where we were just going back and forth.
You know, walking the 20 miles down the road takes you a week. You know, up until the availability of the Model T, what was it? You were born, lived, married, reproduced, and died within 25 miles of where you were born.
Because you weren't going further than that.
You weren't going further than that, unless you joined the military, you know, or there was a reason to move. It's, you know, humans for traveling everywhere are also limited. Cultural reasons wind up causing that, because at the same time, people walked the Silk Road. Right. People walked the immigrant trail to Oregon. Indigenous tribal trade networks went all over the country walking, because at the time period, that's what you did. It's before the advent of the horse. It's before, you know.
Which is a crazy debated subject that is so frustrating.
It is. The horse thing is, it comes, and that is an example of, hey, here's this wild hypothesis. You need to account for all of these things.
Right.
You know, and one of the biggest things is the lack of evidence, you know, and the lack of evidence from the groups in question. You know, you have oral histories that do exist that were passed down before horses arrived with the Spanish. Now, the wild card is crazy things, evolutionary wise. Horses evolved in North America. They were a megafauna that the environment changed at the end of the Younger Dryas too quickly for them to keep up.
Yep.
And the stressed populations
died off.
Well, guess who helped them? Humans, you know. At the end, you see a lot of these megafaunal animals in the Americas disappear because not only do they have the stresses of the environment changing, their food sources disappearing, the genetic diversity of the populations waning because suddenly they can't communicate, they can't contact each other. Here. And then suddenly humans are like, get that one.
Well,
you know, get that one.
That one's going slow.
And then, that one's going slow. You know, what if that slow one in this small population was the only viable adult male? You suddenly have, you know, half of the half of the bio pairing that's needed to keep continuing the herd is no longer available. And until you get another one, what are you going to do? You know, it'll take a toll. You know, those humans keep eating things. So, back to the thing that ties the evolution of humans, how they look, and the archaeology and the sociocultural things is that you have to come up with a reason why or a justification why. We've heard the term, and it's not a good term, and I'm sorry if I offend anybody with saying this, but you've heard the term savage thrown at pretty much every population that is not
Cherokee.
Civilized.
Pretty much everybody was a Cherokee. The Eastern Band of Cherokee, to be specific.
Well,
there was 5.
But I'm referring to everywhere in the world. You know, okay. if you look at how the Greeks looked at even city-states in Greece, you know,
the barbarians.
How the Romans, the Romans called the Germans savages. Exactly. They're subhuman. They're whatever. They are lesser than. Why? Oh, because we have all this big stuff. If you suddenly come up on something and you want the thing, you need a justification for, and someone says, well, why are you here? And they're like, well, we're bringing Christianity, or we're bringing education, or we're bringing plumbing or agriculture, all of these things to rise these obviously primitive people out of the muck. How can you make that justification when their city is bigger than yours?
Cahokia was up to 40,000 people.
Yeah. You know, how can you make those distinctions based on the things around you? Just because they don't have guns, just because they don't have iron, does not mean they are less capable than you, or less intelligent, or yeah. So you see the use of racism based on environmental adaptations.
Yes.
You know, as a distinct reason why. And it's incredibly incorrect. There's no basis for it whatsoever. You know, the idea that peoples from Africa are not human because their skulls are shaped differently. No.
We just evolved.
If you know, phrenology came about because, you know, you have a sociocultural situation more than anything else of here's why certain people cause more crime. Because they're in a sociocultural depressed state, and that population just so happens to be predominantly of this ethnicity or this national origin. Because racism...
J.D. Vance even accredited, he said that the Scot-Irish brought violence to Appalachia with them. And he blamed all of the violence throughout the history of Appalachia, not on coal mining bosses and everything else, but on Scott.
On the Scott. He's trying to pick a fight with me now, is he? Oh, well, I'll show him some of that Scotch-Irish.
Listen.
Oh, we get into politics, it's all downhill.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, first off, that thought process, that blatant dismissal of reality is so incredibly devastating when it comes to either trying to educate or, you know, introducing new things that need to be considered. Politics is a great example because you have somebody who's in a political position.
Right.
And they say this, and someone's going to say, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. They have no concept of where it's coming from. They have no concept of the facts that come from, but the fact that somebody who's important enough to be on TV said it. Now they're going to believe that. They're going to.
And no one uses Google Scholar.
Yeah, well, that's just too hard. You know, Vance saying that the Scots and the Irish brought violence to Appalachia, ignoring the fact that humans have been killing each other off or fighting or doing whatever for 200,000 years. And don't begin to think that human ancestors didn't fight with each other over resources either.
Facts.
Violence exists in the world. In nature, it's a lot more, there's a lot more reason for it. It's, you know, you're protecting your population. The resources, you're fighting for the resources. You're fighting in self-defense. You know, human warfare is so convoluted and dumb. But, you know, he just ignored the fact that because you don't want to acknowledge that there's more Scandinavians in Ohio or whatever the census tells you, because I don't even know if that's real. But, you know, if you go to Michigan, there's more Scandinavians in Michigan than there are Scots or Irish.
Well, there's more Dutch in northern Appalachia than there is in southern Appalachia.
Yeah. Looking at a population of people based on where they're from and the fact that you saw Braveheart or some crap like that.
Which didn't you
and then
see
making
the
that statement
they were going through, bro? They had a right to be violent.
It's so ridiculous. You know, in the last, I'm going to call it 40,000 years of human history, where you see the rise of what we consider today as civilization, what we consider to, because of the influences of all of these cultures, being able to communicate, being able to mix and combine.
As humans actually dominated the scene.
Yep. You see it's less of a physical evolution and more of a cultural evolution, more of a, of sociocultural, then affecting the archaeological record, and then the archaeological record in turn affecting the sociocultural. You know, stuff like, the making of bronze. Nobody planned that. It didn't just appear.
Right.
I guarantee you it was somebody who accidentally did something.
And
they might have accidentally done that thing for a couple generations before somebody picked it up and went, holy crap, how'd you do this? Now, if I tell you that story, holy crap, I did this. And then you tell your friend who immediately gets on a plane and flies to Italy to tell his cousin, who then starts telling people that, somebody in Italy will be like, you know what, that might work. I have some tin, I have some copper, which is better than the stuff I was screwing around with. And he mixes it together. See what happens. You know, the trade of information, the trade of ideas, the influence that cultures all around the world have, or cultures around Eurasia and Africa especially, but then, you know, after, you know, 1492, with Columbus getting lost, you suddenly have, you know, the influence and the addition of the indigenous populations of the Americas into the worldview, which is, again, I gotta say, is kind of dumb because they had an entire worldview that didn't have us in it.
That's what
How dare we assume
they had
us or gods from our side of the pond were even there, you know?
Right.
It's really interesting. And it is incredibly complex.
And it's also,
I mean,
discouraging to see how it was done. It's like,
incredibly.
There's so much work to be done to fit. Now, so we'll start wrapping it up with this, because we've really covered like what archaeology is doing. How can archaeology help take the misinformation from early technology and people who didn't necessarily want to give credit to other cultures, let's say, how does archaeology, and then someone like myself who, you know, getting a history degree and so on, how do we fix it? How do we come to a consensus, to a united idea?
So first things first is that on the whole, across the entire planet, all of the human populations need to start educating a little bit better, because we have an education system here that's focused on the values here. You know, you're in the Bible Belt, you're in the South, you're in wherever, and you have one curriculum that's focused on.
I hate it.
It's affected by religion. You have another curriculum that's focused on, and it's affected by your social standing. And what I mean by that is, like, go to Iowa. Everybody's a farmer. If you want to go and be an actor, you want to go be a dance professional, you want to be an artist, you want to be a neurosurgeon, everybody around you is a farmer. It's not encouraged. So, hey, why don't you learn this thing that deviates from everything that we think you're supposed to know? You know, we're not the only ones that do that. The extreme is probably North Korea. Yeah. You see how their education system is affected. But you have education systems all around the world that are based in those worldviews. That's a hurdle, but that's such a large hurdle. That's like an ant contemplating my truck. It's such a big thing. In the field of archaeology, and I not to pat myself on the back, but I think that especially in the last 30 years, archaeology has really cleaned itself up from the colonial, take the pretty shit, ignore the indigenous populations, saying, hey, this is our history.
Accelerated even more.
Yeah.
The last 5 to 10 has been super accelerated on that.
And that comes from both the ease of some technology that was available in the 80s or in the 90s, but LiDAR, you know, or really accurate carbon-14 or really accurate potassium argon dating suddenly becomes like financially viable.
Yeah.
If money wasn't a question, we would have this better technology in the 60s. Carbon dating came out in like 1963. We would have been able to do a lot more stuff with the carbon dating if it had been available, but it's not. So, getting away from the whitewashing of history, nobody ever wants to admit that they're the bad guy.
Right.
You don't want to admit you're wrong in a fight. You don't want to admit that you were speeding. You don't want to admit that you didn't do very good on a test. You don't want to admit that your ancestors might have showed up and that homestead that was in the family stories, they run somebody off it. They brought, they participated, even if it's a participation. Because I've had somebody say, you're just a white colonizer. I'm like, half of my family showed up in 1929. They were in Scotland, and they had absolutely nothing to do with the Indian Wars or anything like that. But, there is a acknowledgement that I have to go that, well, yeah, Europe did some shitty stuff. There's been so much stuff, and here's where I hope you don't get too much hate for the statement, where the number of people in the world who have been killed in the name of Christians' God is in the millions. Why? Nobody wants to admit that.
You higher don't want any other religion.
Because, well, yeah, by far, But say like my buddy who is just too happy and go lucky for his own good. I can tell he doesn't want to acknowledge that. He accepts it. He understands it. And in our conversations, he has gone, I am aware. And, my faith is mine. I'm pretty sure, because he supports LGBTQ and everything. He's like, I'm pretty sure that in some Christians' view, I'm going to hell. And if I go to heaven and God's like, no, you allowed abortion to be a thing, you're going to the hot place. Well, he's like, well, I guess I'll go to the hot place and know that I lived my life the best I could. He doesn't want to deal with some lady coming into the store, finding out that he's Christian and going, you guys are responsible for the deaths of millions of people. Nobody wants to admit they're wrong. But the problem is that we've got to acknowledge that.
Because it's
what
truth.
Archaeology can do, what history can do, historians can say A, B, and C. They are working from sources that were laid down by somebody who wrote A, B, C, D, E. And then somebody further back wrote A through H. And then somebody all the way back when that history was being made wrote the whole alphabet. And then time has kind of chopped it up. You're going off of sources that you have that are available. Well, the old adage of, the victor writes history is something that has affected history.
Especially my field of view, my field.
Yeah.
More than anyone's.
The history of the Americas, the idea that indigenous people never had their own writing systems, that their civilizations weren't civilized. That comes from the fact that there's one, nobody bothered to ask them their history. And two, so many researchers are basing their information off of history that comes through like the Spanish monks or tradesmen or soldiers' diaries, who are operating with a worldview that is biased to whatever. One of the most amazing. Sorry, go ahead.
We judge a lot of indigenous culture based on our wars with them. We collapsed their society, and they were in shambles, and we used their one moment of shambles, and we ignore their thousands of years of history. And we paint their whole culture out of this shambles that we created.
Yeah. Which is, again, something that you have to go through and fight against. The problem is that if you don't have something written down, how do you prove
what do you have?
that? Well, archaeology.
That's you.
Is not the writing. Archaeology is the stuff.
Is the proof.
Is the proof. So, and I've had people ask me this, and I don't know if I've ever actually answered the question. What is the difference between a historian and an archaeologist? And a historian is the person who, and forgive the way I word this, the historian is the storyteller relating the story.
Mm-hmm.
The archaeologist is the one holding up the thing that proves that story is right, or that story is true. So, you have a history, like a very whitewashed history of what the Romans did when they invaded Celtic lands in Europe. Julius Caesar expanded the Roman Empire, and he's this great leader, and lots of things are written about Julius Caesar, right?
You opening up.
Oh, I know.
Pandora's box
I mean, I know. But when you look at the archaeology of that time period, what Julius Caesar did was kill a million people and enslave a million people and completely turn the sociocultural systems in those parts of Europe upside down. You see this sudden drop in art. You see this sudden drop in material culture, valuables. You see this sudden drop in economy. Why? Because Julius Caesar rolled in and expanded the Roman Empire and did all of these things. Well, nobody wants to acknowledge that one of the greatest leaders in history is a bad guy.
Right. Alexander the
Julius
Great
Caesar,
wasn't great.
Alexander the Great was spreading Hellenism.
Yes.
The people he invaded didn't necessarily need it. They didn't want it, The difference being, some of it's political, some of it is steeped in racism.
Yes.
Lots of it is steeped in religion. But like prior to, when Christianity is still growing out of the Middle East and stuff, prior to that, it's a lot more. It just doesn't seem to be, historically speaking, a lot of racism. A lot of the stuff that we find very visible today, except for the fact that it absolutely is. Except for the fact that there are the little weird sociocultural things that stem back to our lizard brain that make us suspicious or cautious around others who have such a different appearance.
Right.
One of the things that is not very talked about in history when people are quoting Herodotus, it is a well-known account, but for some reason it doesn't get taught in history. Some reason it doesn't get taught on bad documentaries. He's at a site of a battle, which happened like 20 years before. And it was a battle between the Egyptians and the Persians.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes the claim that you could pick up a pebble and cave in the skull of a Persian because they are lesser humans. And this is why their skulls are so soft. Their mothers wrapped their heads in cloth as infants. And that weird thing is a justification for why apparently Persians are less human than the Egyptians, who cut their hair as children, and therefore you can't throw a rock through a sun-bleached skull, which is like, that is so incredibly stupid. But it's a perfect example of somebody going, here is this and here is this, and I know this and I don't know this, so this has got to be good, this has got to be bad.
And if I'm Persian, I'm looking at Egypt and I'm going, do you see what your king looks like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's, Egypt is unique in the fact that there's so much of it.
Yeah.
So much of it.
There's so much history there.
Everywhere in the world, there is so much of it. But the Egyptians just did it so big that there has been a lot of focus there.
Yes.
I have never been to Egypt. I probably know more about Egypt
I want to go.
than the landscape I work in. Only because for the longest time it has been the first and the most easiest, and there's so much work done on it. But again, like an Herodotus, who is the father of history. That's a great title. He's cited as the father of history all over the place. He's also known as the father of lies. And he was known as the father of lies like 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
They were aware that he talked shit.
Yes.
Well, if you don't know that bit of that history and you share the things that Herodotus said, just the things he said in like this scroll, that's a chunk of history that's missing.
Well, and you can
if I dig something up or find the scrolls that then fills that picture in, not only did I just prove what you had to say, I also added to it.
But also, like, at the same, I can write down a bunch of Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock quote nonsense, put it on a piece of paper, put it somewhere where it's going to be dry and stable for 10,000 years, and in 10,000 years, someone can pick up that piece of paper. It doesn't make that piece of paper right.
No, it doesn't. That's why you have to compare it to everything else. That's why you have to have other stuff that collates and corresponds around that shows that, yes, this is a thing. So archaeology in excavation of sites, in data collection, in stuff, showing that the narrative, the colonial narrative, is incorrect, is a way to discount the people like Vance saying stupid shit. Saying something, writing it down even, does not mean it's true. It really does help to be able to hold that thing.
Yeah.
Finding the site. So this is a good example. Lansau Meadows in Canada is a Viking site from the beginning of the 10th century.
Yeah, 11. I thought it was like 11.
950 to about 1065 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's proof 100% that Columbus was not the first European to set foot in North America. It proves the Vikings came all the way here. It proves all of this stuff. The site was known about and recorded for several decades before the final evidence that said, yes, this is an absolute Viking site was found. And that was the presence of slag iron from where the blacksmith had his shop.
Yep.
Which is something that did not occur in the Americas until the Spanish showed up.
Yeah. And not the Spanish can make the claim down south of us, the Spanish from over there.
The Spanish from Europe. Somebody could say this is a Viking town. You can write down this is a Viking town. Many people will accept that this was a Viking town. I'm the one that can look at it and go, yes, this is a Viking town. And this is the piece of evidence that absolutely proves it.
And then I write it down.
And then you write it down. And what do you write down? Oh, Morgan found a piece of iron that proves the Vikings were there. No, Archaeowolf discovered a piece of iron that dates to this time period and is, and proves that the site is actually Norse.
Has
iron would have been A, B, C, D. Yeah. There's so much that goes with it, know. So I think that it's, we in the archaeological community and people who appreciate archaeology, it is not bias. What comes out of the ground is not bias because it's our stuff. Our stuff has no emotion,
or is dead.
Our stuff, our stuff has no emotion. Our stuff has no opinion. It comes out of the ground and it tells a story. And if it tells the story of an indigenous site or of an indigenous community that was massacred, you cannot get away from that. You can write it down and say nothing happened here, but someone can look at the archaeology and be like, explain this. And it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to have to acknowledge that your group was
with the Cave of Bones documentary on Netflix.
Yeah. Yeah. It's to change the to what it can do to help us get out of where we're at. I think it's just going to continue showing the extent of human possibility.
Yeah.
And it will show how incredibly different human populations are, and yet how incredibly alike they are. Because we're all the same creature. We are all the same human animal. People don't want to agree with that. You know, you don't want to agree that, you know, and again, socioculturally,
wait. We're not the same as the English. Stop it. Stop it. Do you hear me, Professor Howard Williams? Are you listening? We are not alike.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
over an imaginary line. I know, but someone would say that with absolute seriousness. Over what? An imaginary line drawn on a map 700 years ago?
And a war that happened a long time ago.
Yeah. People don't want to associate with bad things. They don't want to associate with being connected to something that has a negative connotation.
But they'll hold on to the negative connotation stereotype.
Yeah, because it can separate them.
Right.
Because you can put a line in the sand that says, well, these people, ignoring the socio-political and the socio-cultural reasons why this population is depressed, and more of them go to jail than not, and here's this line in the sand that I can hide behind.
Right.
You know, and it's very flimsy. We all humans need to acknowledge, and it goes both ways. Yeah, I will say that because I have seen creators and other people speak, and the difference between the stuff coming out of their mouth and the stuff that's coming out of the mouths of extremists on the other end of the spectrum is there might be some more eloquent verbs, and the color is different.
Right.
That's it. And it is a problem.
People will jump wholeheartedly into bandwagons. And there's actually a creator that I really like.
We're social animals.
But
you want to do what the group says.
Yes. And there's a creator that cool. I really, really enjoy. And I hope to have him on this podcast. But when the news of Lee Berger's Homo Naledi broke, he jumped all over it. And he was making TikToks and just like promoting the heck out of it. And then the documentary came out. And he was like, "Oops." And he had to go on and apologize and be like, "Hey, I thought this was something that it wasn't."
Yeah. But you know what that documentary did? Along with the stunt of sending some bones into space? It got his project funded.
I can't believe we did that.
It got his project funded. It got people paying attention to the work he was doing. So it's getting out there.
In some ways, it's a good thing because it's bringing more eyes to that aspect.
But in some ways, it's bad because now people are like, oh well, archaeologists and anthropologists do this kind of stupid shit now. Right. It is a double-edged thing.
It's a double-edged. It created interest, which is a good thing, but it also had
at the cost of what?
At the cost of disinformation and seeing a professional jump to conclusions on camera when he knows he should not. That was the part where I wanted to like Dallas Cowboy my TV.
Yeah, and that's the part that injures our credibility in the face of someone like Graham Hancock, who is saying archaeologists are all wrong. Look, this guy got it wrong on television. And because of social conditioning and because of associations with things in the past, there are populations of people that they associate being educated with being rich, and being rich is bad. Because being rich are the guys who own the coal mines.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a miner and you got treated badly by the company,
which side are you going to choose, boy?
Exactly.
That was a song.
So, so you got when Hancock appeals to the people that distrust academics or don't want to listen to academics, he can say, "Oh, here's a specific academic in this field who's wrong. Look, he's wrong." And that just allows the people who don't trust academics to go, oh, well, he must be right. One, he's on TV. He wouldn't be right if he was on if he wouldn't be right if they put him on TV. Or it can't be wrong.
Well, because he's the problem with the History Channel.
Yeah. They see, and that's just a money thing. You know,
exactly.
I'm old enough to remember, and you are probably too.
I remember the History Channel was
about 2002. Yeah, you know, Modern Marvels. I learned more about Victorian era to the early 20s engine based on that TV show than I did in any engineering class that I ever took.
And Bill Nye,
it was documentary, and it was educational.
Yes.
And what'd they replace it with? Ancient Aliens.
Freaking
Oak Island.
Hairy guy. His hair was getting took off by UFO.
Yeah. And one of the things that, and you notice as he progresses, he becomes more crazy and more wild. His hair does. That's a gimmick. That's a gimmick for the show. You know,
it is.
The educational stuff, you can only rehash that, and you can only present that a number of times before people go, okay, we've seen this, teach us something else. The Ancient Aliens and Oak Island stuff,
you can take it as far as you want.
And Graham Hancock are throwing out there, you can learn more. There's secrets and conspiracy. Tune in next week. Here's a commercial for the brand new Ford F-150.
There it is.
People are like, well, what happens? Tell us what happens.
Antarctica.
Let's talk about Antarctica. Like, so I saw the video. Somebody was like, we've never been across Antarctica. I was like, didn't a girl just ski across the center of Antarctica like 4 years ago in a world record breaking
We have base
adventure?
You can literally go there and stay in a hotel. Like, they have base stations there set up.
There's a station there.
It's like a 5-star hotel.
There's been an extensive amount of work there.
Yes, we know what's
the reason why there's no big city there is because no one wants to live in Antarctica. There's no resources.
Cold.
There's no resource base.
Cold.
You know, So when you get into the pseudoscience stuff
with oxygen, it's just like there's nothing alive there. Not really.
There is not. Yeah, and you'd have to change and bring in and do all of this extra stuff, which in the end costs dollars, and you know. It's people don't want to part with their dollars.
No. Oh no. Hold on.
Oh no.
Yeah.
You know, there's a. God, I just lost my train of thought.
It's because my phone hit the 20% mark.
Oh yeah, maybe that's it. I was gonna say. Crap. I'm gonna remember ADHD moment. I'm gonna remember, later. The pseudoscience stuff that continues to be spread, continues to be pushed, that archaeology is showing isn't correct, is one of the ways that the racism continues. The racism, the religiously driven biases, the sociocultural pushes to both maintain
with the Vikings especially.
Oh yeah. The sociocultural push to kind of maintain boundaries of, othering of people and to keep down other populations, because I have had the misfortune of meeting people, who there's been lots of crap, throughout history, justifications as to why all this stuff happened to their cultures, and they accept it because it's such an worldview shattering thing.
Yes.
To have that be, you just accept it because how could such a thing happen? You know, the people that continue to put that grasp onto that stuff, they're literally going, well, this guy said that white people showed up and gave the brown people agriculture. We're better than them. They need to be subservient to us. They need to acknowledge us as the better because we invented it first.
Never mind, they had the whole forest set up as a garden.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is, you see, though, the simplicity of just picking that up.
Yes.
And saying, look, you know, do you remember Kennewick Man?
Mm-hmm.
So when they first did a forensic reconstruction on the bones of Kennewick Man, the reconstructionist, he looked a little bit like Jean-Luc Picard. Some very kind of distinct European features, but the clay was pale colored.
Yep.
And because the clay was pale colored and he looked a little bit like Jean-Luc Picard, some white supremacy group out of like Michigan claimed Kennewick Man as an ancestor and then went on a tangent of the indigenous people killed all the white people in America, which is why they got everything they deserved with the reservations and the Indian Wars and stuff. And it's like, where did you find that particular piece of garbage?
Oh my gosh.
But again, it was, here's a thing that looks like a thing that I approve of.
So let's take it and make it.
I'm going to hold it up and say, here's proof. So when I rail on the conspiracy theory, when I rail on Graham Hancock or Joe Rogan or the people on TikTok who say the stuff, it's because it is a recognizable detriment.
Oh, I have 2 hours.
Two actual history
that I can use. Oh, there goes my son coming out. They've been in their rooms.
When I just saw head and feet because of the bookcase. But when you know, the thing that archaeology is showing is that those shows are incorrect.
Yes.
Those shows do not hold water. You know, and when you look at the breakdown of the evidence and creators like Mini Minuteman do their YouTube shows. I don't know if you've watched his stuff. He did a series on the ancient apocalypse.
It was really good.
And if you know, listening to that, it's like he just shot down every single argument that Graham Hancock was hanging his hat on. And he did it with stuff that's easy to find. He did it with stuff that has been proven by science. And Graham Hancock just doesn't have a foot to stand on. Thanks. And notice the first thing Hancock does is, the archaeologists are out to get me. I'm public enemy number one to them. It's like, we don't really give a shit. What you are doing is encouraging racial division. What you are doing is cultural erasure. What you are doing is continuing to perpetrate this stuff that the archaeological record does not support, but history does not support, because archaeology is filling in the gaps in history. Archaeology is, on occasion, finding that piece of undeniable proof that is written down that shows that what archaeology and what the professionals are saying is real. I'm sure you've heard of the Merer Papyri.
Oh yeah.
Here's our for people who are watching the podcast who don't know, the Merer Papyri, which was found in 2013 in a cave, is literally like a 2-week foreman journal of a guy named Merer and his crew of 40 guys who were hauling 2.5-ton polished casing stones from the quarries to Khufu's pyramid.
And it even has reasons
literally picked up block at Tura South, traveled, docked at Tura North, offloaded. It's literally a written record of the guy in charge of moving the rocks.
Yeah, well, it even had
No
things
aliens
on it.
involved.
No, and it even had reasons why people called into work. It
Oh
had
yeah,
like mother was being mummified, and like things like that on it.
yeah. There are excuses written down,
Yeah,
and the Egyptians again, because the Egyptians, everything about their history is so concentrated and so well preserved because of the environment. You have all of these. They recorded everything. Where they recorded stuff in stone, you can actually go see where they tried to erase it.
yep, chipped off.
Akhenaten.
Yeah,
All the faces of Akhenaten are chipped away. Speaking of the convergent evolution in human culture, Akhenaten came up with the Aten.
yes,
One god.
yes.
Gets rid of all gods.
He was the first.
I think it was the first monotheistic religion.
Yes.
So Christianity is not a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity developed in another part of the world, closer than not, but still it developed in another
and
system.
You can see the reflections between that and the storm deity of Baal. That's where it comes from.
It's the things can develop without help. You don't need to explain things. This is poking at the people who the pyramids in Africa have to be the same as the pyramids that are in Central and South America. And it's again just the easiest way to stack some rock. But how could they do it without contact? Convergent evolution. Because we're smart. Humans
figure stuff out.
Making the pyramids. Yeah, we figure stuff out. Humans making the pyramids, humans first figuring out the domestication of some form of plant.
Or dog.
Simply by going, we like this and we don't want the deer on it. So they chase the deer away and promote the growing.
Yeah, we're going to move it over here. We're going to dig it up.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Since the earliest points of Homo sapiens to today, the brain capacity has not changed.
Nope.
The potential for intelligence has not changed. They were just as smart as us.
We have just built.
The things that are different is the stimuli.
Yeah.
The outside forces. The stuff that we can look at and expand. Access to. If you are a little group of Homo sapiens living in the mountains, and the only thing you know is mountain goats and rock moss, and there's nothing out there to challenge your worldview on animals like a camel, you're not going to know about a camel. You're not going to know about an alligator. That does not make you any less smart. That means you just have it's not in your bank. It just hasn't, and it's outside stimuli brought in. So, it's we have the benefit of hindsight. We have the benefit of 20,000 years of communities growing, becoming more than villages, more than towns, more than townships, to cities, that become these massive culture civilizations that then collapse and get replaced by something that is better in the sense of it addresses some of the mistakes that were made, comes up with its own mistakes, that continues to change. We have all of that to look back on and go, yes, we can pile that all together.
We can pile that all together and create
here's what we can refer to. Meanwhile, ancient humans didn't have that.
Right.
Again, it doesn't make them less intelligent than us. They know things about their world that we absolutely don't.
And we'll never know.
And won't ever know, because the world has changed enough.
Exactly.
That, it's so... to study humanity, to study anthropology, to study archaeology, it sounds straightforward, and then you learn that it is not.
It is not.
Oh man! And the more you look, the more it splits, and the more you look into the splits, the more it splits, and the more things just happen. And it's phenomenal. I love the job,
but it is complicated.
It is complicated.
My phone is on 10, so we gotta
Yeah, I don't
and
want to.
we gotta let it upload after we hang up here. But um, yeah, thank you for coming on. One, you can see the
Yeah,
tag
thanks for having me.
on you can find him on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. Are you on Meta?
Hmm.
You're on Meta too. I gotta find you on Meta.
No,
No, you're not on
no,
Meta. You're just
I
IG
have a
and
personal page. I just have an Instagram. I'm
gotcha.
not a fan of the Meta
Yeah.
Facebook. Yeah, I'm on YouTube. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitch, Archaeowolf 01.
Yes.
I'm I'm on there doing D&D occasionally. I don't really play anything, but yeah,
Very
lots of
cool.
content where I present stuff not as an academic. And I've been told that you're a better teacher because you kind of come in and
And talk.
I'm the guy that hits the stick on the desk and suddenly you're paying attention.
Yeah.
Um, People have also called me condescending because, but that's whatever. But
Whatever.
yeah, so yeah, no,
I
thanks for having
appreciate
me
it.
on. This is great.
I and I definitely want to do it again. Especially I kind of
Hmm.
want to do an Egypt one. Um,
We
but
can do an Egypt one. Again, Egypt is not my focus. So there are
right.
others who are way better at Egypt.
I just
Um,
don't know them.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'll send you a bunch of people that if you don't already follow them, you should.
Cool, cool, cool.
Um, and yeah, no, that'll be cool. This was
All
awesome.
right.
Thanks for having me.
This was a blast. I had an absolutely great time. I feel like we covered
Oh,
everything I wanted to cover
and I
and
hope for
more.
everybody who's watching and listening that I didn't tangent too much. That's part of my ADHD is that I'll hook
Those are the
onto
best
something.
conversations a lot of time.
Talking to me is like Wikipedia in the middle of the night. You look up when was the first Ford truck made, and by 5 in the morning you're talking about interspatial physics and wormholes to the coffee grinder or some shit. I don't
That's
know.
hilarious. All right, guys,
So
make sure you check the link in the bio, and all of that stuff. I'm going to put his beacon on a link in my bio so you can check his stuff. And we will catch you guys next time. Stay on. So that finish uploading real quick.